pleasant day to each and every one of you. Welcome to THM06, Multicultural Diversity in Workplace class. This is Ma'am Venise Ocampo, your instructor in THM06. For today's lesson, we are going to talk about Module 2.1, which is the Introduction to Cross-Cultural Communication. For the learning objectives after reading this module, you should be able to, number 1, explain the definition of cross-cultural communication. Number 2, describe cross-cultural communication in a workplace setting. Number 3, compare high context versus low context of culture in a work setting. Number 4, discuss the importance of cross-cultural communication. And number 5, explain the importance of cross-cultural training for hospitality and tourism employees. So now let's begin discussing cross-cultural communication. But before that, let us first define what do we mean by the term communication. So ever since you've studied, some of your teachers or majority of your teachers already defined the word communication. But let us first reminisce what the term communication is. So when we say communication, these are the act of transferring. So take note of this. Act of transferring or exchanging information. So how would you act or transfer or exchange information from one place, one person, or to a group or another? So when we say communication, it involves three people or it involves three aspects, which is so let's write it here. It involves the sender, the message, and of course, the recipient or the receiver. So as you can see, when we combine everything, communication is the act of transferring or exchanging information from one place to another to a person or group that involves the sender, the message, and the recipient. So that is what we called communication. So in Tagalog, communication is ito yung way natin kung paano tayo makakapag-exchange, makakapag-deliver ng mga impormasyon, ng mga salita sa iba't ibang tao, sa iba't ibang lugar, or sa grupo mismo ng mga tao. So why do you think communication is important? Okay? So why do you think communication is always important, especially when you are working in our industry? Because it is says here that being able to communicate effectively is the most important life skills. When you know how to deal with people, when you know how to communicate with other people properly, when you know the proper etiquette on how to talk with them, so basically you have the so-called life skills. So now, let's go to the other term, which is the cross-cultural communication. So as stated in here, cross-cultural communication have been strategically important to companies due to the growth of global business technology and the internet. Understanding cross-cultural communication is important for any company that has a diverse workforce or plans on conducting global business. So nowadays, because of the innovation, because of the growing population, because of the, let's say, high technology and the use of internet, cross-cultural communication is really important, especially if you are going to invest, if you're going to make your country or let's say your company turn into a global business. So this type of communication involves an understanding of how people from different cultures speak, communicate, and perceive the world around them. So when we say cross-cultural communication from the word itself, we are going to cross, we are going to, let's say, adapt, we are going to encounter different cultures, different languages, different beliefs, different religions, wherein we need to understand them. We need to understand where are they coming from. We need to understand them more in order for us to communicate effectively. So cross-cultural communication in an organization deals with understanding different business customs, beliefs, communication strategies, and so on. So in cross-cultural communication, we have the so-called language differences, high context versus low context cultures, non-verbal differences, and power distance. So those are the major factors that affect cross-cultural communication, which later on we will discuss further. So we have here an example on how cross-cultural differences can cause potential issues within an organization. So for example, Jack is a manager at a New Mexico-based retail conglomerate. He has flown to Japan to discuss potential partnership with a local Japanese company. His business contact Yamato is his counterpart with the Japanese company. Jack has never been to Japan before and he's not familiar with their cultural norms. So now let's look at some of the ways that a lack of cultural understanding can create a barrier for business success by examining how Jack handles his meeting with Yamato. So in this case, si Jack is isa siyang manager ng isang malaking kumpanya. And now, kailangan niyang pumunta ng Japan to discuss about their partnership with a Japanese company. And then meron siyang kaibigan doon or meron siyang kakilala doon which is si Yamato. So sa tingin ninyo, pagpunta ni Jack sa Japan, dahil first timer lang siya doon, first time niyang ma-visit yung Japan, ano-ano yung mga magiging issue, ano-ano yung mga possible barriers or ma-encounter na problem ni Jack sa pagpunta niya ng Japan. So as you are watching this lesson video, kindly think of it. Ano ba yung mga possible natin na ma-encounter na problem, particularly sa tinatawag na communication kapag tayo is pumunta na ng ibang bansa? Which is iba na kasi yun, di ba? Iba na yung mga tao doon, iba na yung mga languages nila, iba na yung way ng pamumuhay nila and way of interaction and so on. So, cross-cultural communication thus refers to the communication between people who have differences in any of the following. Okay? So, cross-cultural communication, ito yung way natin on how are we going to communicate with multiple cultures, with different cultures across the world. So, sinasabi dito, yung mga differences, it can be the styles of working, your age, nationality, ethnicity, race, gender, sexual orientation, and so on. So, cross-cultural communication can also refer to the attempts that are made to exchange, negotiate, and mediate cultural differences by means of language, gestures, and body language. Kasi yun naman talaga yung ginagamit natin when we communicate with other people. Of course, we use our own language. We use different gestures para mas maging effective and efficient yung ating pakikipag-communicate. And at the same time, we use our body language. So next one is the difference between the high and low context culture. So listen very carefully, or you might also take down notes of the following points that I will say. So high context versus low context culture. So let's first read this first paragraph. So the concept of high and low culture relates to how an employee's thoughts, opinions, and feelings and upbringing affect how they act within a given culture. Let's say, for example, in North America and Western Europe, they are generally considered to have low context cultures. This means that the businesses in these places have a direct, individualistic employees who tend to base decision on facts. So now, let us first define what is the difference between high context and low context culture. So take note of the following points that I will say. So when we say high context culture, this refers to the societies or groups where people have close connections. Okay? So when we say high context culture, this refers to the societies or groups where people have a close connection over for a long period of time. So, ibig sabihin, sa high context culture, dito nakabilong, dito nakasaad or nakapaloob yung isang group sa isang society na wherein sila yung mga tao na meron na silang matagal na connection. So, sino-sino yung mga tao na to? Usually, they are the people with number 1. They have the same level of education. They shared the same ethnicity. When we say ethnicity, dito nakapaloob yung ating language, yung ating nationality. They have or they share a same religion. And of course, they have the same or shared history. And most likely, pag sinabi nating high context culture, it is concerned in a group success rather than individual achievement. So as mentioned a while ago sa example natin kay North America and Western culture or Western Europe na wherein sila is low context. So pag sinabi nating high context, sila yung mga grupo na ang kanilang focus is about the success of a group, not an individual success. And at the same time, they would rather be concerned sa group success rather than those individual achievements. And aside from that, they also have a long connection over a long period of time. So sabi pa dito, high context cultures are the opposite in that trust is most important part of business dealings, which is true. Ang isa sa mga importanteng factors or aspect when we are going to have our own business is to build and create trust. Okay? Ibig sabihin, tiwala. How are we going to trust our partners? How are we going to trust our employees? How are we going to trust yung ating mga business partners, yung ating mga customers, target market, and the local community? So most likely, yun talaga ang isa ring important aspect ni high context culture. These are areas there are areas in Middle East, Asia, and Africa that can be considered high context. Organizations that have high context cultures are collectivists and focus on interpersonal relationship. Individuals from high context cultures might be interested in getting to know the person they are conducting business with in order to get a gut feeling on decision making. So dahil si high context culture is most likely open sila sa iba't ibang klaseng tao, they also like to get to know the person first bago sila mag-engage sa isang business. They also like to know the person even more bago nila pagsabihan ito ng iba't ibang information about a certain business. Ibig sabihin, nandun sila sa point na they need to get to know each other first bago tayo pumunta sa business manners or business matters. So they may also be more concerned about business teams and group success rather than individual achievement. So as mentioned a while ago. So for example, yung nabanggit natin kanina, Jack and Ramoto ran into some difficulties during their business negotiation. Jack spoke quickly and profusely because he wanted to seal the deal as soon as possible. However, Yamato wanted to get to know Jack and he felt that Jack spoke too much. So dahil si Yamato is one of the Japanese employee or isa siyang mga counterpart dun mismo sa pinuntahang company ni Jack, so si Jack gusto niya matapos na agad yung deal, maklose na nila agad yung deal. Para nang sa ganon, maayos na yung business. Kumbaga, makuha na agad niya. Matapos na yung negotiation. But then, iba yung culture kasi ng mga Japanese. So, si Yamato, as one of the Japanese counterpart, gusto niya na kilalanin muna si Jack bago nila ma-close yung deal dun sa proposed business. So, Yamato also felt that Jack was only concerned with completing the deal of his own self-interest. So, dun tayo nagkakaproblema. If walang proper communication, other people might misunderstood you. Other people might think of the different ways kung bakit ganun yung reaction mo, or they might think that you have the so-called conflict of interest. So, it says here that was not covered with overall good of the company. So, syempre si Yamato, dahil iba yung kanyang culture, iba yung kanyang nationality, so, ang tingin niya, si Jack, gusto lang na may close yung deal because for self-interest. Okay, sariling interest, and at the same time, hindi talaga concerned si Jack sa mismong standing ng company. Siguro napilitan lang si Jack or talagang ginagawa lang ni Jack yung trabaho niya na kailangan ma-close yung deal, pero aside from closing the deal, wala siyang gustong i-create na harmonious relationship or let's say harmonious communication towards Yamato. So Jack's nonverbal cues did not help the negotiations either. So ibig sabihin, kung hindi maayos yung pakikipag-communicate ni Jack at may ibang na-feel si Yamato, ibig sabihin hindi rin magiging maayos yung deal nung negosyo or hindi rin nila maiko-close yung negotiation. So, cross-cultural communication has been influenced by a variety of academic disciplines. It is necessary in order to avoid misunderstandings that can lead to conflicts between individuals or groups. Kasi yun naman talaga ang purpose ng communication. For us to exchange information from one people to another or to a group. But of course, in order for us to have an effective communication, we must know properly how to deliver those informations for us to avoid yung tinatawag na misunderstanding o yung hindi pagkakaintindihan. So on the other hand, how about naman yung tinatawag natin na low context culture? So paano naman si low context? Okay? So, si low context culture, take note of this, usually they are diverse, they are more focused on individual instead of a group communication. So, parang yung sinabi ko kanina, kabaligtaran po siya ni high context. So, si low context, mas focus siya sa mga individual achievements, mas focus siya sa mga individual communication rather than sa maramihan or group. So, for them, sa mga nasa low context culture, basic communication is enough to allow them or to allow many people to understand. Ibig sabihin, they prefer yung mga simpleng usapan lang, mga simpleng explanation lang, rather than sa high context na medyo complicated, na medyo complex yung pinag-uusapan because more of them or most of them is nakatuon sa business style. Kumbaga, ang kanilang focus is business. So, aside from that, they also have a difference. So, si high context communication, take note of this, they are more of oral communication. Ibig sabihin, gumagamit sila ng mga verbal communication, rather than kay low context culture, na ang ginagamit nila is more likely yung written communication. So, pag written communication, so alam niyo naman na yun, it can either be through letter, okay, written letter, and so on. So, aside from that, si low context communication or low context culture, they most likely to ask yung tinatawag na what's happening, where it was happening, when it will happen, how it will happen. So, sila yung mga tao na involved dito sa culture na to na marami silang tanong. Okay? Unlike from high context culture, they focus on longer forms of communication. na ang focus nila is hindi yung basic questions na katulad nung na kay low context. So sabi ko nga, mas complicated yung mga questions, yung mga pinag-uusapan ng mga taong involved sa high context culture. Kasi 'di ba, sa high context culture nandun yung mga tao na they have the same education. Let's say, ito yung mga tao na puro professionals, ito yung mga tao na nasa top management level, and so on. So, it says here that when two people of different cultures encounter each other, they not only have different cultural backgrounds, but their systems of talking also are different. So, hindi lang kasi yung mismong cultural background nila yung nagkakaiba. Hindi lang yung religion, hindi lang yung, let's say, history, political stand, sexuality, gender. Hindi lang yung kasi yung pagkakaiba nila, but also the way they talk. Okay? The way they talk, the way sila magsalita, the way they deliver messages. So, most likely, yun yung pagkakaiba talaga ni low context and ni high context. So, cross-cultural communication will be more effective and easier if both of the speakers have knowledge of the turn-taking system being used in a conversation. So, for example, one person should not monopolize the conversation, or only one person should talk at a time. So, ibig sabihin, dapat kapag may isang usapan tayo, let's say may meeting, hindi dapat isang tao lang yung magsalita, na puro siya lang, na puro idea lang niya. It means, for us to have an effective conversation and communication, dapat lahat ng mga tao, they have their own say, they have their own ideas that they will express later on. Para na sa ganun, malaman natin yung kanilang mga ideas, mga opinions nila, ano yung standpoint nila for a particular subject matter. Para nang sa ganun, ma-i-address if ever there are conflicts, there are issues. So, but before we go to the 5 keys to successful cross-cultural communication, we must first identify what are the principles of cross-cultural communication. So, kindly take note of this because this is an additional points in our lecture. So, number 1 is, of course, awareness. It is very important that you are aware na sino ba tong taong kausap ko? Ano ba yung mga languages niya? Ano ba yung standpoint niya sa buhay? You need to be aware. Dapat alam mo. Kasi if you are aware, may iwasan natin na makapagsabi tayo ng mga hindi magagandang bagay na pwedeng ma-offend yung isang tao. Number 2 is preparation. So, kapag tayo makikipag-meet or let's say meron tayong meeting with our clients, with our guests, or may haharapin tayong mga guests, we need to be prepared. Regardless of who they are, regardless of what nationality, what ethnicity, what race, and so on, we need to be prepared sa diverse differences ng mga tao na yon. Number 3 is the language. So, as you are studying from now, you are learning different languages aside from English. So, if you're going to finish your bachelor's degree, kapag 4th year na kayo, you will have your foreign language. So, it's either Korean or Japanese or Nihongo. So, you will learn other languages. And aside from that, you can learn from different platforms. Next one is the humor. So, it is very important na hindi naman tayo puro seryoso lang. So, there should always be a sense of humor, a sense of, let's say, being funny, but not to the point na mawawala na tayo sa pinaka-subject ng pinag-uusapan natin. So, a sense of humor might do. So, para maalis natin yung tension, yung pressure sa isang communication or conversation. And the last one is the openness. So, openness, it means that you have to be open, you are willing to accept yung mga ideas, regardless kung sino yung nagsabi niyan. Hindi porket na foreigner yung nagsabi, na ganito yung dapat na gawin, ganito yung idea, dapat umuo na tayo agad. So, tingnan din natin yung mga pros and cons ng mga sinasabi nila. Particularly, we need to be aware of the communication, the information they are delivering, if it is legit, if it is possible for change or hindi. So now we need to go here sa 5 keys to successful cross-cultural communication. So number 1 is you need to be proactive. So para daw tayo is maging maayos yung ating communication towards other people, towards other cultures, especially in business, we need to be proactive. So ano yung sinasabing proactive? You need to focus on creating trustful partnership, not on the business at hand. So bago kasi tayo tumungtong sa pinakaseryosong aspeto natin sa business, bago tayo mag-seal ng deal, hindi naman pwede na yun agad yung pag-uusapan natin, di ba? Usually, we need to talk, let's say, how are you? Kamusta ka na? Kamusta na yung family mo? Or let's say, if you are, let's say, connected to one another, matagal na kayong magkakilala. So, start with a light talk. Start with a light conversation. Para nang sa ganun, mas maging comfortable kayo sa isa't isa, and later on, mapag-usapan nyo ng mas maayos yung negotiation o yung mga gusto nyong talakayin. Number 2 is use some cultural rapport. So, ano ba pag sinabi nating rapport? So, when we say rapport, this is harmonious, relationship. Ibig sabihin, we need to build harmonious relationship towards other people, regardless of what culture they are. So, adopt new marketing material and business approach as needed. So, since i-adapt mo na din naman yung culture nila, why not ipasok natin sa marketing strategy yung gusto ng particular culture na to? Ano ba'y gusto ng mga millennials nowadays? We need to consider it sa ating marketing strategy, sa ating approach on how are we going to, let's say, attract them. How are we going to persuade them to buy the products? How are we going to persuade them na mag-check-in sa hotel natin, na mag-dine-in sa ating restaurant? So, we need to consider them and create harmonious relationship. So, how are we going to create harmonious relationship towards them? So, madaming paraan. It can either be yung proper way of advertising. You can either give some flyers, talk to them, ask them about the product, or even create a testing. Diba? Yung mga free taste sa mga products. So, number 3 is organize productive interactions that ensure a win-win for all parties. So, sa business, as much as possible, we want a win-win situation. Ibig sabihin, lahat kayo panalo. Lahat kayo ma-achieve nyo, lahat kayo successful. But of course, there are times in life, or especially in business, that you will really lose. Matatalo ka talaga. Mabibigo ka talaga with a particular situation. So, it is very important that in the future, if you become an employee, or let's say an entrepreneur, a businessman, you're willing to take the risk. That not all the time, you will win. Diba? There are times that you will lose. There are times na mababankrupt yung isang company. There are times na mapapagalitan ka sa workplace because of the things that you did. O kaya naman, may mga bagay ka talaga na nagawa na mali, pero dahil hindi mo alam kung bakit na nagawa mo yun. So, sometimes you are really clueless about things in life. But of course, we need to make sure that if we lose, we will create a way on how to win again. So, yun naman ang ating pinaka-importante na isipin. So, next one is develop strategies for relationships and business cycles based on appropriate levels of formality, business hierarchy, and timing. Of course, if you are on a top management, mas madali mo makakausap yung mga na ibang tao na nasa higher position na, lalo na kung ibang company yan. Let's say, ipapadala kita sa ibang company para kausapin yung president ng ganitong company. So, ibig sabihin, mas madali sa'yo because you are on the same position. Nasa same level kayo, na parehas kayong nasa top management. So, ibig sabihin, for example, I have my secretary. Uutusan ko siya na pumunta sa kabilang department para kausapin yung head doon. So, I need to think Kaya ba nakausapin ng sekretary ko yun, given the fact na mataas yung posisyon nun, baka ma-intimidate yung secretary ko, and so on. So, ibig sabihin, we need to balance our decisions in life, lalong-lalo na sa business, na we need to maintain yung tinatawag na formality. Lalong-lalo na talaga sa business, sa hospitality industry. We need to follow yung tinatawag na standard operating procedures kahit anong mangyari. Okay? Unless na lang na we can negotiate, na we can customize things, that's the time na pwede natin ialis yung formality. But if you're really one of the professionals, dun tayo sa formality side. Especially sa business hierarchy, diba? Top position down to the rank and file position or sa pinakamababa na position. So number 5, learn the do's and don'ts of the country and cultures with which you are partnering. So, yun naman ang importante din. So, if you're going to negotiate with other people, alamin mo muna yung tungkol sa kultura nila. Alamin mo muna kung ano yung mga gusto nila, mga hindi nila gusto, ano yung mga dapat at hindi dapat gawin. Lalo na kung nagpunta ka or magpupunta ka sa ibang bansa to negotiate with them. Kasi 'di ba, baka ma-culture shock ka na tinatawag. Mabigla ka na, ay, ganun pala yung kultura nila. Ganun pala sila manamit, ganun pala sila magsalita. So in that case, para maiwasan natin na ma-offend sila or ma-offend ka, so you really need to understand, you really need to learn yung culture ng kausap mo. But not necessarily na kailangan mo pa talagang pag-aralan ng buong buo. I mean, the basic background of the people you're talking with is enough. So how can you proactively prepare for multicultural business? O let's say for example, you're going to build your own business in the future. How are you going to prepare? So as mentioned a while ago, so naulit na lang yung iba dito, is to awareness is the first step. So observe how people communicate with you in person, on the phone, and by email. So iba-iba kasi yan. Nowadays, we don't get a chance to see our teachers, our classmates, so nakikita lang natin on how they are interacting with us through Zoom, through Google Meet. Pero di pa natin sila nakikitang magsalita personally. Hindi pa natin sila nakikita na mag-deliver ng message personally. Okay? So, iba rin yung way ng mga tao on how they are going to talk to you through phone call, di ba? Through tawag, hindi rin natin alam. Or naninibago tayo kasi iba naman yung way nila ng pakikipag-usap kapag personal kesa sa phone. And of course, through email. So, it is very important also na as early as now, matutunan nyo na paano ba gumamit or paano ba gumawa, paano mag-send ng proper email. Kasi yun din na kailangan talaga natin kapag tayo is nagtrabaho na. Sending a simple email with complete details is very important. And of course, tinuturo naman yan sa inyong mga computer subjects. So, know your facts. Ayan, be aware of the relevant historical data, economic issues, major industries, cities, geography, and so on. So, ibig sabihin, if you're going to build your own business, you must know the facts, yung mga katotohanan, yung mga information na reliable, okay, yan, nabulol na si ma'am. So, informations that are reliable, informations that are relevant to your company. Hindi natin kailangan kumuha ng impormasyon na galing sa ibang kumpanya because ang focus natin is yung company natin. We might do a benchmarking or competitive, let's say, competitive strategy, pero not to the point na i-chismis mo na, diba? Not to the point na magiging spy ka na or so on or gagawa ka ng unnecessary movement towards other companies. So, hone your cultural rapport. So, as mentioned earlier, so you have to make sure that you create a harmonious relationship towards other people, especially when you're going to manage an international business. You need to go beyond your personal comfort zone. Kasi syempre, ibang bansa na yung pupuntahan mo eh. Ibang tao na yan, ibang nationality. Hindi na yan Filipino. Okay? Mga foreigners na yan, American, Australian, 'di ba? Mga Lebanese, mga let's say Chinese, Korean. So you really need to know them well before investing, before going to a topic about your business. So keep in mind that we are homogenizing as a global culture, so we can't ever take cultural tendencies for granted. It means global, pangkalahatan. So, globalization, sabi nga natin. So, ibig sabihin, hindi ka lang magfo-focus sa isang aspeto. Hindi ka lang magfo-focus sa isang bansa. Because when you're working in a hospitality industry, kapag kayo is nag-OJT na, lalo na sa mga malalaking hotels, sa airlines, so you are going to meet a lot of people, a lot from different nationalities. And you really need to face them with professionalism and face them with, let's say, that you are an educated one, na kaya mo silang kausapin despite of their differences. So next one is the importance of cross-cultural training for hospitality and tourism employees. So it is very important na ang isang company meron silang cross-cultural training. But as early as now, dahil napag-aaralan na natin siya, you can adapt all the points that I'm saying. You can really absorb it or bear in your mind para in the future, you can apply all of this. So cross-cultural training is not only useful for employees from different cultures and ethnicities to work together, but it is also necessary for employees to learn how to handle certain situations. Yes, it is very important. You need to properly handle a certain situation. If that situation is crucial, let's say may mga guests na nagreklamo sa'yo, galit na galit si guest sa'yo, how are you going to handle it? Are you going to, let's say, embarrass the guest? Are you going to, let's say, fight against the guest? Or are you going to do the standard operating procedure or the protocol? So, sa cross-cultural training, dun talaga yun din pinag-uusapan. So, globalization has greatly affected the tourism industry. So, when we say globalization, these are the speed up or growing interdependence of the world's economies, culture, population that is brought by cross-border trade in goods, services, technology, flow of investment, people, and information. So, ibig sabihin lang ng globalization, ito yung, let's say, paglago ng ekonomiya ng isang bansa, ng kultura ng isang bansa, ng population ng isang bansa across the country. Ibig sabihin, may collaboration na globally, buong mundo. So, ibig sabihin, yung ekonomiya ng isang bansa na to, dahil sa sobrang ganda ng strategy nila, pwedeng i-adapt ng mga nasa ibang bansa as long as it is applicable. So, the need for diversity training is serious and urgent because diverse customers have different cultures and traditions that have to be dealt with. Otherwise, they will be unsatisfied customer. So, ayaw natin yon to create an unsatisfied customer. Our aim at the end of the day is to satisfy our customer. At the end of the day, we want them to be happy sa mga products and services na binibigay natin sa kanila or ino-offer natin sa kanila. So, diversity training, cross-cultural training, and other related trainings na i-conduct ni company is really important. So, in today's age of digital devices, unsatisfied customers can share their bad experiences with others via many different tools. So, let's say you are unsatisfied, hindi mo nagustuhan yung pagkain sa particular restaurant na to. Nakita mo na medyo may dumi sa pagkain, may buhok sa pagkain, or let's say hindi maganda yung services. As a customer, you all have the power to embarrass that restaurant. May kakayahan ka na ipahiya yung restaurant na yon, but you know that yung pagpapahiya is not really good. Hindi yan mabuti, hindi yan tama. So, ibig sabihin, dahil iba-iba nga tayo ng kultura, iba-iba tayo as a person, may tendency na may customer na i-report ka sa social media, i-post sa social media yung ginawa mo, i-post sa social media yung na-encounter niya na experiences, which later on, it will create a big impact sa company or sa restaurant or sa isang organization. Kasi, yung mga bad experiences natin, pag yan kumalat, other people might misunderstood you. Baka sobrang loyal ko na sa isang restaurant na to, Pero dahil nangyari yon, ma-disappoint ako, i-post ko. I-post ko sila sa Facebook, i-post ko sila sa Twitter or Instagram, masisira yung image or reputation ng company. So sabi nga natin last time, it is very important sa isang company to maintain yung good image. Para na sa ganun, mas marami pa silang customers, guests na mahatak or ma-attract. So when consumer is making a purchase decision for an intangible product or service, such as those offered in hospitality and tourism industry, he will often use interpersonal influence and word of mouth. So it is really true that word of mouth is one of the powerful marketing tool or method. So pag sinabi ko na, ang saya pala mag-check-in sa Shangri-La Hotel because sobrang accommodating nung kanilang mga employees, yung mga staff nila. They are very friendly, talagang aasikasuhin ka nila, and very, let's say, very useful yung kanilang mga services. Talaga namang masasatisfy ka, maganda yung kwarto, the interior designs of the guest room, yung mismong building, is really attractive. So, ibig sabihin, as a guest, pag kinalat ko yun, marami ring guest ang maku-curious na, ay try natin mag-check-in sa Shangri-La Hotel kasi according kay Ma'am Ara, maganda pala yung services, try natin. So, ibig sabihin, yung word of mouth, yung comment mo na yun, yung feedback mo na yun, it can spread. 'Di ba? It can create a positive effect sa company kasi meron kang magandang feedback towards them. So, as such as unsatisfied customer who is sharing his negative experiences with his neighbors or an online community can have a significant impact on the company's reputation. So, nowadays, ang pinaka-powerful method talaga is the social media. So, sabi ko nga sa ating classroom rules, think before you act or think before you click. Because in just one post, you can either make the person suffer, you can either make the company suffer, you can either destroy one person or a company. So, think before you click. That is very important nowadays. So, syempre, kung may mangyaring mga negative impact, hindi lang yung company ang maaapektuhan, pati yung mga employees. Okay? Yung mga employees nila. Pwede rin kasi silang mabash, pwede rin kasi silang, let's say, masabihan ng mga hindi magagandang bagay because sa nangyari sa company na yun. Of course, depende sa level nung problem or nung issues. Okay. So, it says here that employees in tourism and hospitality industry are already subject to high turnover even as new hotels open every day around the world. So, yung sinasabi natin dito na employee turnover, this is an act of replacing an employee with a new employee. Dahil nga sa dami ng mga hotels na nag-open nowadays, naku-curious yung iba, why not itry kong magtrabaho naman sa ibang hotel? Why not itry ko naman magtrabaho sa ibang restaurant? So, in that case, may nagre-resign, may nag-a-apply. So, ibig sabihin, pag nag-resign ka, they need to hire new employees, kailangan ulit nila yun i-train, same goes with you. Pag lumipat ka sa ibang company, sa ibang establishment, ganun din yung gagawin mo. Mag-i-start ka ulit from the bottom. So, this is why it is important to focus on their training so they can learn how to handle the gap between different cultures that coexist in the type of workplace. Kaya nga 'di ba, bago naman talaga sumalang ang isang employee sa isang trabaho, there are several trainings that you will need to do or encounter. Lalong-lalo na if you're going to let's say apply for a flight attendant position, if you're going to be a front office associate, a waiter, a barista, a bartender, and so on. So, marami talaga kayo mga trainings na kailangan pang pagdaanan. Not just a trainings with regards to your skills, but also with regards to the pakikipagrelasyon towards other people. Not the intimate kind of relationship, but the relationship that you need to build with your co-employees, with your guests, in terms of sa tinatawag natin na working environment. So ultimately, cross-cultural training is not only useful for employees from different cultures and ethnicities to work together, but it is also necessary for employees to learn how to handle certain situations that are raised by customers from diverse cultures, religions, and ethnicities. So to summarize everything, cross-cultural training, cross-cultural communication is really important for us to communicate effectively to the diverse workforce, diverse employees within a certain company or organization. So take note of everything that I mentioned in this lesson video. So that's it for our module 2.1. If ever you miss some points in our lesson video, feel free to replay it or even download our YouTube video. So thank you so much for listening in our today's lesson and hope to see you again in our next one. Thank you and keep safe.